inside the brain of an Alzheimer's patient, when neuropathologists actually conduct an autopsy, they're generally looking for the classic markers of the disease.
Right, the physiological hallmarks.
Exactly. They're looking for, amyloid beta plaques, they're looking for tau tangles. But recently, scientists have been finding something else entirely.
Something that really shifts the whole paradigm.
It's terrifying, honestly. Nestled right there, deep inside the degraded neurological tissue, they aren't just finding the damage, they're finding the exact same living bacteria that causes common bleeding gums.
It's frankly one of the most unsettling discoveries in modern neurology.
Yeah.
And it fundamentally shatters how we view the human body.
It really does. So today we are taking a deep dive into an extraordinary, radical 13-year medical movement. One that suggests your dentist, not your neurologist, not your GI doctor, but your dentist, might actually be the first line of defense for your brain.
And your entire systemic health, really.
Right. We are exploring the evolution of a healthcare vision pioneered by Victor Ronald KM, who is widely recognized as the father of holistic dentistry down in Costa Rica.
Also known as Víck in the decentralized finance space, which, will become very relevant later.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to trace this whole journey from the 2013 founding of Costa Rican BioDental, which was Central America's very first holistic dental practice.
All the way to this completely groundbreaking transformation they're undergoing right now.
Yeah, they are attempting to fuse the clinical reality of biological medicine with decentralized blockchain technology.
They're literally building the world's first patient-led clinical service DAO.
Which is wild. And for you, the listener, this deep dive is basically a direct shortcut to understanding the absolute bleeding edge of where human health meets organizational tech.
Because the source stack we're pulling from today is incredibly dense.
Oh, it's massive. We've got the highly specific clinical protocols straight from Costa Rican BioDental. We are unpacking a comprehensive, heavily cited scientific treatise on vegan dentistry and the oral gut-brain axis.
We also review some high-stakes legal documents outlining an ICANN top-level domain application.
Right, plus audio analysis of modern biohealth paradigms. So it's a lot of material.
It is. But when you lay it all out, a remarkably clear and I'd say urgent picture emerges. It really challenges the fundamental architecture of modern medicine.
Exactly. But to understand why Victor Ronald KM is trying to take a physical brick-and-mortar dental clinic full of surgical chairs and x-ray machines and, put it onto a decentralized blockchain, we first have to understand the biology.
We have to understand how he completely redefined the mouth.
Right, because traditionally dentistry operates under a very mechanical philosophy, doesn't it?
It really does. The traditional view treats the oral cavity like a completely separate entity from the rest of the biological organism. It's treated like a mechanic's toolbox.
You just go in to fix the broken parts.
Exactly. If a tooth is decayed, you drill the tooth. If a gum is inflamed, you clean the gum. You extract, you fill, you polish, all in total isolation from the cardiovascular system or the nervous system.
Which makes no sense when you really think about it.
Right. But Victor's framework, which the sources call his applied healing vision, completely dismantles that mechanical isolation.
He looks at the mouth not as like a separate room in the house, but as the front door to the entire biological network.
Precisely. It treats the oral cavity as a profound neurological and immunological gateway.
Okay, so to truly grasp the gravity of this, let's dive into the mechanics of the oral gut-brain axis. Let's start with the mouth and the gut.
Okay, well, most people never think about their saliva unless they're eating, right?
Yeah, usually.
But the average adult actually swallows between 0.5 to 1.5 liters of saliva every single day.
1.5 liters. I mean, that is a massive volume of fluid just constantly moving from the mouth down into the digestive tract.
It is. And every single milliliter of that saliva contains hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, of microscopic organisms.
Just float in there?
Yep. Now, in a state of oral homeostasis, meaning your mouth is healthy, the pH is balanced, and the bacterial colonies are kept in check by your immune system, swallowing that bacteria is perfectly fine.
It's just a natural biological process.
Exactly. But the problem arises when a patient develops oral dysbiosis.
An imbalance, basically. The bad bacteria start outnumbering the good.
Yes. Maybe it's driven by a diet high in processed sugars, or maybe poor oral hygiene. Or very often, it's a hidden chronic infection deep in the jawbone.
Like an old root canal or something.
Right. Whatever the cause, the bacterial profile of the mouth shifts to favor pathogenic, disease-causing microbes.
Okay, but the traditional, maybe somewhat outdated medical thinking was that this wasn't a huge systemic issue, right? Because of the stomach.
Right, because the human stomach is an incredibly hostile environment. It has a pH of around 1.5 to 3.5.
It's essentially a vat of hydrochloric acid.
It is. So the assumption was that the stomach acts as an absolute biological incinerator.
You swallow the bad bacteria from your bleeding gums, they hit the acid, and boom, they're instantly destroyed.
That was the assumption. But the research detailed in our sources reveals a very different, much more dangerous reality.
Which is what?
Many of these pathogenic oral bacteria have evolved incredibly sophisticated acid tolerance mechanisms. They don't just die when they hit the stomach.
They survive the transit. Wait, how exactly do they survive a vat of hydrochloric acid?
It's fascinating. Some of them upregulate the production of specific proteins that literally pump protons out of their cells.
So they maintain a neutral internal pH even while surrounded by acid.
Exactly. Others literally form protective biofilms. They're essentially hiding inside microscopic slimy bunkers as they pass through the stomach.
Oh, wow.
The result is that when you have oral dysbiosis, you are constantly, 24 hours a day, swallowing live, aggressive pathogens that translocate straight into your delicate intestinal tract.
And once they get to the gut, I assume they don't just politely pass through the digestive system and exit the body.
No, they definitely do not. They engage in what the scientific treatise calls ectopic colonization.
Ectopic just meaning occurring in an abnormal place.
Right. These oral bacteria physically attach to the lining of the gut and set up permanent colonies. They actually begin competing with your natural, beneficial gut microbiome for resources.
So an infection that started in your gums has now physically migrated and set up a secondary infection inside your intestines.
Yes.
To use an analogy for the listener, it's like looking at the human body as a massive water treatment plant. If the intake valve at the reservoir, the mouth is constantly pumping in toxic sludge, adding a billion-dollar filtration system downstream at the city tap, the gut isn't going to solve the systemic problem.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The source is compromised.
Right.
And the consequences of this ectopic colonization are severe. The presence of these foreign oral bacteria in the gut triggers a massive immune response.
Because the immune system recognizes that these microbes do not belong there.
Exactly. So it deploys inflammatory cytokines to fight them. This creates chronic, localized inflammation in the intestinal lining.
And the treatise explicitly points out this mechanism is a massive driver of inflammatory bowel disease, right? IBD.
Yes, which encompasses debilitating conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
And it also drives leaky gut, doesn't it?
It does. The chronic inflammation damages the tight junctions between the cells lining the intestines.
And normally, those cells are packed tightly together, acting as a selective barrier.
Right. They only let fully digested nutrients into the bloodstream while keeping bacteria and toxins inside the bowel.
But when those junctions become damaged and leaky,
highly toxic bacterial byproducts like lipopolysaccharides spill directly into the systemic bloodstream.
okay, so that establishes the profound connection between the mouth and the gut. But let's look upwards, because the mouth is geographically located literally inches from the brain.
Very close, yes.
How exactly does the oral-brain connection work? Because the brain has the blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to be the most secure biological vault in the entire body.
It is supposed to be secure, yeah.
Yeah.
But the mouth has two direct highways that can completely bypass or breach that security.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first pathway is neural. The physical structures of your mouth, your teeth, your periodontal ligaments, your gums, are rigidly innervated by major cranial nerves, specifically the trigeminal nerve and the facial nerve.
These are the nerves that allow you to, like, feel a toothache or control your facial expressions.
Correct. And there is emerging evidence suggesting that certain pathogens and the intense inflammatory signals they generate in the jaw can actually travel retrogradely.
Wait, meaning they travel backward?
Yes, backward, up the physical sheath of the cranial nerves, moving directly from the jaw straight into the brainstem.
That is deeply unsettling. The physical nerve acts as a literal fuse leading to the brain.
It does. But the second pathway is the one that has researchers incredibly alarmed, and that's hematogenous spread.
Spread through the bloodstream.
Right. When a patient has chronic periodontitis, which is severe gum disease, the gum tissue becomes highly inflamed and ulcerated. It breaks down, it bleeds.
Which means the vascular system is wide open.
Exactly. Every single time that patient chews a piece of food, every time they aggressively brush their teeth, or honestly, even just the mechanical pressure of swallowing, they are physically pushing oral bacteria directly into their open capillaries.
And straight into the systemic circulation.
Yep.
And this brings us right back to that terrifying autopsy finding we started with, because the sources highlight one specific bacteria that seems to be the ultimate villain in this entire oral gut-brain narrative.
Porphyromonas gingivalis.
Often just abbreviated as P. gingivalis.
Right. It is considered a keystone pathogen in severe gum disease, but the treatise makes it very clear that this bacteria does not stay confined to the oral cavity.
No, it is highly mobile. And what makes P. gingivalis so incredibly dangerous is the specific weapon it produces, right? It secretes highly toxic protease enzymes known as gingipains.
Yes, gingipains. Think of them as microscopic biological scissors. They are designed to literally chop up human proteins so the bacteria can feed on the amino acids.
And neuropathologists are finding these biological scissors inside the brain.
They are. Independent research teams are finding both the DNA of the P. gingivalis bacteria itself and high concentrations of these toxic gingipains physically located inside the brains of deceased Alzheimer's patients.
That is wild.
And even more critically, they are finding these gingipains co-localizing, meaning physically occupying the exact same space with amyloid beta plaques and tau tangles.
Which are the primary physiological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease.
Exactly.
Okay, hold on. Let's really interrogate this. Because if millions of people have gingivitis and a large percentage of the population develops Alzheimer's, how do we know this isn't just a coincidence?
It's the most important question to ask.
Right, because if I'm a patient listening to this, my immediate thought is, maybe people who are suffering from severe cognitive decline just happen to have poor dental hygiene because they forget to brush their teeth. Are we sure the mouth is actively causing the brain damage, or is it just a tragic correlation?
The difference between correlation and causation is everything in medicine. But the scientific consensus detailed in the BioDental documents points heavily toward an active causal driver.
This isn't just a passive byproduct of forgetting to brush.
No.
So how do they prove that? How does the bacteria actively breach the blood-brain barrier?
The treatise describes a fascinating and sinister mechanism known as the Trojan horse effect.
The Trojan horse!
Yeah. These P. gingivalis bacteria don't always just float freely in the bloodstream, where they might be easily targeted and destroyed by the liver or the spleen. Instead, they actually infect the body's own immune cells.
Specifically, macrophages.
Right.
And macrophages are the large white blood cells that are supposed to eat and destroy foreign invaders.
They are the garbage collectors of the immune system. But P. gingivalis has evolved to survive inside the macrophage after being swallowed.
It essentially hijacks the vehicle.
Exactly. The infected macrophage, acting as the Trojan horse, travels freely through the bloodstream. And because it is recognized as a normal human immune cell, it's allowed to cross the highly selective blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow. So it just drives right through the checkpoint.
It does. And once inside the brain tissue, the bacteria can emerge and release its toxic gingipains.
That is a staggering level of biological evasion. So the bacteria is inside the brain. What does it actually do to cause neurodegeneration?
It comes down to neuroinflammation. The presence of the bacteria, the gingipains, and the systemic inflammatory signals leaking up from the gut completely alter the behavior of the brain's own resident immune cells.
Which are called microglia.
Yeah.
And microglia, they are like the maintenance crew for the brain, right?
Under normal conditions, yes. They quietly patrol the neural tissue, clearing out dead cells and supporting the health of the neurons. But when they detect the presence of oral pathogens, these microglia become highly reactive.
They switch from a protective state into a highly aggressive defensive state.
Right. They start churning out massive amounts of pro-inflammatory cytokines.
So the brain's immune system gets locked into a hyperactive state. It panics.
Exactly. And this state of chronic neuroinflammation is what actively drives the neurodegeneration.
The constant inflammation damages the delicate neurons.
It impairs the synapses where memories are formed, and it accelerates the buildup of those amyloid beta plaques. The body's trying to defend itself, but the chronic nature of the infection means the immune response ends up destroying the very tissue it's trying to protect.
So the silent infection in the jaw is literally pulling the trigger on the inflammatory gun in the brain.
That's exactly what's happening.
That completely changes the stakes of going to the dentist. It's not just about keeping your smile pretty, it's about protecting the structural integrity of your brain.
Absolutely.
And if we accept this paradigm, if we accept that the mouth is a direct multi-lane biological highway to both the brain and the gut, then suddenly every single material you put into that mouth during a dental procedure matters on a systemic level.
It matters immensely.
Because you can't just put whatever industrial material is cheapest into a cavity if that material is going to leach into the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier.
Which logically necessitates a complete, ground-up reevaluation of what dental materials are actually made of. And this brings us to the second major pillar of Victor Ronald KM's applied healing vision.
Right. The ethical and biological shift toward vegan dentistry.
Yes.
The sources note that Victor Ronald KM serves as the president and CEO of a company called Vegan Dental Inc., which was founded specifically to address a massive market gap for ethically formulated, strictly biocompatible oral care.
And we really need to clarify this for the listener immediately.
Yeah, let's do that. Because when we say vegan dentistry, we are not talking about the magazines in the waiting room. We aren't just talking about a doctor who recommends eating more broccoli.
No, we are talking about the physical materials being permanently implanted into the human skull.
Right. The term vegan here is applied to the entirety of the clinical supply chain. It's heavily grounded in the ancient Indian philosophical principle of ahimsa,
Which translates to non-harming or non-violence. In traditional Western medicine, doctors swear the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm.
But historically, that oath only applied to the human patient sitting in front of them.
Exactly. The vegan ethical framework expands that imperative globally. It fundamentally challenges the deeply entrenched assumption that we have to exploit, harm, or harvest animals in order to achieve optimal human health.
And when you actually look at the list of hidden animal derivatives used in everyday conventional dentistry, it is truly shocking.
It is.
I think the average patient, even a patient who has been a strict dietary vegan for decades, would have absolutely no idea what is routinely being put into their mouth.
It's incredibly pervasive, mostly because it's rarely, if ever, disclosed.
Let's look at oral surgery. When a patient needs a dental implant, they often require a bone graft to build up the jawbone, right? So the implant has something to anchor into.
Right. And the conventional standard of care for these procedures relies heavily on xenografts.
Xenografts, xeno meaning foreign.
Yes. Specifically, these are bone grafts derived from bovine meaning cow or porcine meaning pig sources.
Wait, so a conventional oral surgeon is literally taking processed bone harvested from a slaughtered cow and packing it directly into the open surgical site in your jaw.
Yes. That is standard, everyday practice worldwide.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop at complex surgeries. The everyday mundane consumables used in a dental cleaning are often full of animal products.
It's like,
The glycerin and stearic acid that are used to give commercial toothpastes and the polishing pastes used by hygienists, their smooth, creamy texture. Those are frequently derived from rendered animal fats.
what about treatments for kids? Like fluoride treatments?
The fluoride varnishes that pediatric dentists routinely paint onto children's teeth to prevent cavities often contain gelatin, which is derived from boiling animal skin, tendons, and ligaments.
Oh, that's awful.
They also frequently use shellac as a binding agent, which is a resin secreted by the female lac bug.
Okay, let's pause here because I can completely understand the ethical argument. The ahimsa imperative makes perfect sense from a moral philosophy standpoint.
Right.
If you can heal a human without harvesting a cow or boiling a bug, you should do it.
Right.
But let's look at this purely from a medical physiological standpoint for the listener. Why does animal-free dentistry matter for the oral gut-brain axis? I assume the cow bone they use for a graft isn't just raw bone. It's highly processed, it's irradiated, it's completely sterilized.
Not heavily sterilized, yes.
There is no living cow bacteria left in it. So why is placing a sterilized xenograft into the jaw a biological problem?
Because sterilization does not equate to biocompatibility. The issue is the biological burden of foreign proteins and foreign DNA structure.
Okay.
Even when xenografts are heavily processed, deproteinized, and blasted with radiation, the fundamental crystalline structure of the material is still recognized by the highly sensitive human immune system as other. It is recognized as foreign.
The immune system knows it's not human bone.
Exactly. And while the body might not acutely reject it the way it would reject, say, a mismatched organ transplant, in many patients, these animal-derived materials trigger a subtle, chronic, low-grade immune reaction.
So the immune system essentially sets up a permanent camp around the graft.
Yes, constantly monitoring it and mounting a low-level defense against the foreign material.
And what did we just establish in the previous section about chronic, low-grade immune reactions in the jaw?
that they are the primary engines of systemic inflammation. And that systemic inflammation is exactly what compromises the tight junctions in the gut barrier and exactly what crosses the blood-brain barrier to fuel neuroinflammation and activate the microglia in the brain.
So the logic is completely circular, but in a destructive way. You go to the dentist to fix an infection to lower your inflammation, but the dentist implants cow bone, which inadvertently causes a permanent, low-grade inflammatory response, thereby continuing to assault the brain and the gut.
Precisely. If your overarching medical goal is to cool down an overactive immune system, placing animal bone or porcine collagen membranes into a bleeding extraction socket is entirely counterproductive.
It makes perfect sense.
Biocompatibility is the ultimate goal. You want materials that the body accepts as totally neutral, materials that allow the immune system to stand down and focus on deep systemic healing.
So vegan dentistry isn't just about an ethical stance for animal rights. It is a highly specific medical strategy to reduce the patient's systemic inflammatory burden.
It is an absolute clinical necessity if you are treating the oral gut-brain axis. And importantly, the BioDental protocol does not stop at just swapping out the materials in the clinic.
Right. They also heavily and actively promote a whole food, plant-based diet, or WFPB, for the patient at home.
Yes. And this isn't just a suggestion in a pamphlet. It is considered active primary medical therapy.
Because the oral microbiome is fundamentally shaped minute by what we put into our mouths.
Exactly. We cannot expect the oral cavity to heal if we are constantly bathing it in inflammatory acidic foods.
Walk me through the actual mechanics of that. How does eating a whole food, plant-based diet physically change the chemistry of the mouth and the gut to protect the brain? Let's take a specific example. What happens when a patient eats a massive salad full of spinach and kale?
It's a brilliant cascade of biochemistry. Leafy greens like spinach, kale, and arugula are heavily packed with naturally occurring dietary nitrates. When you put those greens in your mouth and begin to chew, you aren't just breaking down the fiber, you are mixing those nitrates with specific beneficial bacteria that live on the back of your tongue.
And these specific oral bacteria possess an enzyme that humans do not have.
Correct. They reduce those dietary nitrates into nitrites.
So the bacteria are essentially pre-digesting the spinach for us.
Yes. Then when you swallow that nitrate-rich saliva, it hits the acidic environment of the stomach. The stomach acid facilitates a chemical conversion, turning those nitrates into nitric oxide, or NO.
Nitric oxide. I know that molecule mostly from cardiovascular health. It's a potent vasodilator, right? It relaxes and widens the blood vessels, which lowers blood pressure.
It is crucial for cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
But what many people don't realize is how critical nitric oxide is locally, right inside the mouth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, nitric oxide has incredibly potent antimicrobial properties. It actively inhibits the growth of the exact pathogenic, cavity-causing, and gum-destroying bacteria we talked about earlier, like P. gingivalis.
Wait, so by eating spinach, you are literally giving your good bacteria the raw materials they need to manufacture a chemical weapon against the bad bacteria.
Precisely. Furthermore, nitric oxide helps to actively buffer the pH of your saliva. It neutralizes acidity, preventing the highly acidic environment that actively strips minerals from your tooth enamel.
Wow.
So a diet high in leafy greens is literally feeding the physiological mechanism that protects your teeth from decaying and your gums from bleeding.
That is fascinating. It's an active defense system. And what about the gut? How does the plant-based diet translate down into the lower digestive tract to protect the brain?
That entire mechanism comes down to one word.
Right.
Fiber.
Right.
Animal products, meat, dairy, eggs, contain absolutely zero dietary fiber. They're entirely devoid of it. But a whole food, plant-based diet provides a massive, complex diversity of prebiotic fibers.
These are the structural parts of the plant that our human stomachs can't actually digest.
Right, because we can't digest them, these complex fibers survive the stomach acid and travel all the way down into the lower intestine, the colon.
And the colon is where the vast majority of your gut microbiome lives.
Exactly. And these prebiotic fibers serve as the absolute primary food source for your beneficial gut microbes.
They are throwing a feast for the good bacteria.
They are. And when these beneficial microbes consume and ferment that plant fiber, they produce a highly specific byproduct. They manufacture short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
And the scientific treatise mentions one SCFA in particular that seems to be the holy grail of gut health: butyrate.
Butyrate is a superstar molecule. It is foundational to human health. Locally, butyrate serves as the primary energy source for the colonocytes, the actual cells that line your colon.
It keeps them healthy and robust.
Right, and tightly packed together, which actively reinforces the intestinal barrier and prevents the leaky gut syndrome we discussed earlier.
So it physically seals the leaks in the water treatment plant.
Yes, but crucially for the brain, butyrate doesn't just stay in the gut. It is absorbed into the systemic circulation, and it easily crosses the blood-brain barrier.
And once inside the brain.
It is profoundly neuroprotective.
Yeah.
It actively reduces neuroinflammation.
Oh.
It downregulates those aggressive microglia we talked about.
Oh, wow.
It even promotes the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which acts like fertilizer for the brain, helping to grow new neural connections and supporting cognitive function.
So let me trace this whole arc. By chewing plant fiber, you are cultivating a specific population of gut microbes whose entire job is to manufacture a specialized fatty acid that travels up to your brain and actively tells your immune system to stop destroying your neurons.
That is the exact mechanism. You are using diet to manufacture neurological medicine.
Okay, the biological theory is absolutely airtight. The ethical framework is solid. The biochemistry makes perfect sense. But theory is easy, right? Writing a comprehensive treatise is one thing. Actually running a medical facility and putting a high-speed drill into a human being's mouth is a completely different reality.
It's much, much harder.
How has Victor Ronald KM actually applied all of this theory over the last 13 years?
That brings us to the physical, clinical evolution of Costa Rican BioDental. Because they haven't just been theorizing. Over the last 13 years, they have taken these immensely complex biological imperatives and translated them into strict, reproducible, daily clinical protocols.
And they have built a physical footprint across the country to execute them.
They have. Let's look at that footprint.
The sources detail their locations. They have the El Capulin Clinic in Liberia, which is up in the Guanacaste region, catering to both locals and the massive influx of expatriates and tourists.
Right. They also have a clinic in Tinamaste, down in San Jose, which is paired with a holistic wellness spa in Santa Ana, integrating the dental procedures with full-body recovery therapies.
And the strategic documents also reveal an incredibly interesting expansion play. They note an Escazú location that was unfortunately closed during the global disruptions of the 2020 pandemic.
However, they are actively seeking a franchisee right now. They are looking for a partner with significant capital and business experience to reopen that specific location.
Effectively expanding the BioDental brand right into the heart of Costa Rica's massive medical tourism sector, strategically positioned near the Cima International Hospital.
Exactly. So they have established a robust infrastructure. But let's get into the actual operatory room. Let's look at the actual BioDental protocols they perform in these clinics.
Because if a patient walks in expecting a normal dental cleaning, they're going to be shocked. This represents a total, fundamental departure from conventional dentistry.
It really does. Let's examine protocol number 1, which is perhaps the most common reason patients seek out a biological dentist in the first place. Safe amalgam removal.
Traditional silver fillings, I have them. Millions upon millions of people walking around right now have them packed into their molars.
They are ubiquitous in global dentistry. They are cheap, they are durable, and they have been used for over a century. But they are incredibly controversial in the biological space.
Why is that?
Because while they are colloquially called silver fillings, they are actually an amalgam, a mixture of several metals. And the primary component, making up roughly 50% of the filling by weight, is elemental mercury.
Mercury, which is a potent, universally documented neurotoxin. It's the reason pregnant women are told to limit their tuna intake, yet we have historically packed it directly into the human skull.
Yes. And the issue isn't just that it's sitting there. Every time you chew, drink hot liquids, or brush your teeth, microscopic amounts of mercury vapor are released from the filling and inhaled or swallowed.
So many patients, once they learn this, panic. They walk into a conventional dentist and say, I understand this is highly toxic. Please drill it out of my mouth immediately.
And a conventional dentist, wanting to help, might just take their standard high-speed drill, grind the metal filling down to dust, and suction it out.
Why is that an absolute disaster for the patient's health?
Because of the basic physics of the procedure. The friction of a high-speed dental drill grinding against solid metal generates intense, localized heat.
And that
sudden heat instantly vaporizes the elemental mercury. It turns it from a solid metal into an invisible, odorless, highly concentrated gas. If a dentist just drills it out without hyper-specialized protection, the patient, and crucially the dental staff leaning over them, are directly inhaling massive concentrated doses of vaporized neurotoxin straight into their lungs.
And from the lungs, it enters the systemic bloodstream instantly.
Exactly. It bypasses the digestive tract entirely, enters the blood, and travels immediately across the blood-brain barrier.
So by trying to quickly remove a chronic, low-grade toxic exposure, the conventional dentist inadvertently creates a massive, localized toxic exposure event inside the patient's head.
It is incredibly dangerous, which is why Costa Rican BioDental utilizes an entirely different approach. They use the SMART protocol, the safe mercury amalgam removal technique, which was developed alongside the pioneering Huggins protocol.
When you watch this procedure, it doesn't look like standard dentistry. It looks like a hazardous materials containment operation.
It really does. The sources outline the operatory setup, and it is intense. Before they even touch the tooth, they alter the air in the room. They use negative ion generators.
Right. The physics behind this are fascinating. Mercury vapor particles in the air naturally carry a positive electrical charge.
Yes, and the negative ion generators flood the operatory air with negatively charged ions. These negative ions magnetically bind to the positively charged mercury vapor, rendering it heavy.
Which physically pulls the toxic vapor out of the breathing zone and drops it down to the floor.
Exactly, preventing it from being inhaled by anyone in the room.
That's just the ambient air. For the patient, they use forced air ventilation. They completely isolate the patient's nose with a specialized mask delivering pure, clean oxygen, so they aren't breathing the ambient room air at all during the drilling.
They also use a non-latex dental dam to isolate the specific tooth, preventing any metal chunks from falling down the patient's throat. And they use a specialized, integrated high-vacuum suction system positioned literally inches from the drill bit to capture the vapor at the exact point of origin.
The sources also mention a diagnostic step before they drill. They use a device called a rhytometer to measure the electrical current discharging from the amalgam filling before they even touch it. Why are they measuring electricity in a tooth?
That diagnostic step perfectly transitions into protocol number 2, the shift to ceramic dental implants. That electrical current measurement is vital because having mixed metals in the human mouth creates profound systemic issues.
The biological dentists refer to this as galvanic toxicity or the oral battery effect.
Yes.
Explain how the mouth acts as a battery. I'm struggling to visualize this.
Let's look at the basic components of a battery you'd use in a flashlight. You need 2 dissimilar metals, and you need an electrolyte solution to facilitate the transfer of ions between them.
Okay, sure.
Now look at the human mouth. The mouth is a wet, warm environment constantly bathed in saliva. Saliva is essentially a conductive, mineralized saltwater solution. It is a perfect electrolyte.
Okay, so you have the electrolyte. Where do the metals come from?
From a lifetime of conventional dental work. A patient might have a titanium implant, replacing a missing molar on the bottom left. They might have a gold crown on the top right. And they might have an old silver mercury amalgam filling in the back.
Oh, wow.
You now have highly dissimilar metals sitting in a highly conductive fluid.
You have literally built a wet cell battery inside the human jaw.
A literal, measurable galvanic battery. Because these different metals have different electrical potentials, electrical current actually begins to flow between them through the saliva and the surrounding tissue.
And this isn't theoretical. A rhytometer can measure the microamps of current being generated.
Exactly.
Why is a small electrical current in the mouth a problem?
Because the human nervous system operates on incredibly subtle, precise electrical fields. Your brain communicates with your body via microelectrical impulses. When you introduce a chaotic, localized galvanic current directly adjacent to the cranial nerves, it causes severe disruption.
How does that actually manifest for the patient?
It can manifest as unexplained localized pain, a constant metallic taste in the mouth, chronic headaches, and persistent neurological irritation.
Yeah.
Furthermore, this electrical activity accelerates the corrosion of the metals, causing them to break down faster and release toxic metal ions into the surrounding tissue and bloodstream.
Which triggers the systemic immune responses we discussed earlier.
That's exactly.
So Victor's clinics recognized this fundamental flaw in using metal in the body, and they transitioned entirely away from the industry standard, which is titanium implants. Instead, they use zirconium oxide, or zirconia, which is a high-performance, incredible strong ceramic.
Zirconia is a paradigm shift in oral surgery. First, it completely solves the oral battery problem because ceramic is completely non-conductive.
Right.
It is thermally and electrically neutral. It does not react with other metals, and it cannot generate a galvanic current.
But what about how the body accepts it? Because earlier we talked about the body rejecting foreign materials. If a surgeon drills a titanium screw into my jawbone, how does my body react compared to a ceramic screw?
The difference in biocompatibility is staggering. When a conventional surgeon places a titanium implant, the body's immune system recognizes the metal as a foreign object.
It knows it doesn't belong there.
Right. So the body essentially makes a compromise. You can't easily push the metal out, so it encapsulates it. It forms a thin layer of fibrous scar tissue around the titanium to isolate it from the surrounding bone. It tolerates it, but it doesn't truly integrate with it.
And with the zirconia ceramic?
With zirconia, because of its unique biochemical properties, the body does not perceive it as an enemy. You see true, profound osseointegration.
Osseointegration.
The bone-building cells, the osteoblasts, actually grow directly onto and into the microsurface of the ceramic. Furthermore, the soft gum tissue actively bonds to the ceramic collar of the implant, creating a tight, physical, biological seal.
That seal is crucial, right?
Absolutely, because it prevents the pathogenic oral bacteria in the mouth from migrating down past the gum line and into the sensitive jawbone. There is no foreign body rejection. There is only biological integration.
Which brings us to protocol number 3. And we need to prepare the listener because this is perhaps the single most controversial stance in all of biological medicine. It is the protocol surrounding root canal extraction.
It is very controversial, yes.
The BioDental stance is radical. They view a root canal tooth not as a saved piece of enamel, but as a dead necrotic organ. And their philosophy dictates that leaving a dead organ permanently embedded in the human body is a guaranteed recipe for chronic systemic infection.
To truly understand why they take such a hardline stance, you have to understand the microscopic anatomy of a human tooth. Most people visualize a tooth as a solid, dense piece of bone, like a pebble, but it's not.
It's actually highly porous. Under a microscope, the dentin, the layer beneath the hard enamel, is composed of miles and miles of microscopic tubules.
Many little tunnels running through the tooth.
Right. Now, when a tooth becomes deeply infected and a conventional dentist performs a root canal, what are they actually doing?
They drill into the center of the tooth. They scrape out the main pulp chamber, which houses the main nerve and the primary blood supply. They flush that central canal with bleach or other chemical disinfectants, and then they fill that hollowed-out space with a rubbery, inert substance called gutta-percha.
The idea being that you've removed the infected nerve so the pain stops and you get to keep the physical structure of the tooth to chew on.
Right. It's a mechanical solution to a biological problem. But here is the fatal flaw. While the dentist can easily clean out the massive main canal in the center of the tooth, it is physically, mathematically impossible to clean out the miles of microscopic side tubules branching off from it.
So what happens to the bacteria hiding deep inside those microscopic tunnels?
They survive. And worse, their environment is radically changed. Because the main blood supply has been severed, no oxygen is reaching the inside of the tooth anymore.
Which forces the bacteria to mutate.
Exactly. They transition into anaerobic bacteria, highly aggressive strains that thrive in deep oxygen-free environments. And because the blood supply is gone, your body's immune system, your white blood cells, can no longer reach them. Systemic antibiotics cannot reach them.
They are essentially hiding in a microscopic, impenetrable fortress inside your jaw.
Exactly. They sit in those tubules, slowly multiplying and secreting highly toxic, necrotic metabolic byproducts. These toxins slowly seep out of the porous tooth root, directly into the surrounding jawbone and into the lymphatic system, 24 hours a day, for decades.
It is a silent, completely painless chronic infection.
Because there's no nerve left to feel the pain.
Exactly. The alarm system was cut, but the fire is still burning. This is why the BioDental protocol mandates the physical extraction of these toxic dead teeth. You cannot achieve systemic health while harboring necrotic tissue.
But they don't just act like 19th century barbers, pull the tooth out with a pair of pliers and send you home with some gauze. The surgical extraction protocol they use to remove a root canal tooth is incredibly meticulous.
It has to be meticulously executed because the goal isn't just removing the tooth. The goal is ensuring the surrounding jawbone actually heals completely and regenerates healthy tissue. After carefully extracting the tooth, the surgeon uses oxygen and ozone gas O3.
Ozone. I know it from the atmosphere, but how does it work in oral surgery?
Ozone is a highly unstable, highly reactive molecule. When it comes into contact with the cell walls of bacteria, viruses, or fungi, it causes an oxidative burst that instantly ruptures and destroys the pathogen. The biodental surgeon injects this ozone gas directly into the porous, bleeding jawbone socket.
The gas penetrates deep into the bone tissue, tracking down and eradicating the lingering anaerobic infection that had been seeping out of the dead tooth for years.
They chemically sterilize the bone using oxygen. And then there is a critical physical step, the complete removal of the PDL, the periodontal ligament. The clinical sources are incredibly emphatic about this specific step.
And for good reason. The periodontal ligament is a tough, fibrous hammock of tissue that suspends the tooth inside the bony socket, acting like a shock absorber when you chew.
When a tooth is extracted, if the surgeon leaves that ligament behind in the socket, which happens constantly in rushed conventional extractions, the body gets completely confused.
How does the body get confused by a ligament?
The bone-building cells, the osteoblasts, look at the socket and detect the presence of the periodontal ligament. They biologically interpret that signal to mean, oh, the tooth is still here, I don't need to fill this empty space with solid bone. So the soft gum tissue heals over the top of the extraction site, making it look fine from the outside.
But underneath, hidden deep in the jaw, the bone never fills in. You are left with a hollow, dark cavern inside the jawbone.
Recavitation.
Yes, cavitation. And because it's a hollow, unhealed void with poor blood flow, it inevitably becomes a massive breeding ground for necrotic, highly toxic bacterial infections that can silently wreck the immune system for decades. The BioDental protocol absolutely mandates the meticulous surgical scraping and complete removal of the PDL, essentially tricking the bone into recognizing the injury so it can properly regenerate.
Which brings us back to the material science. We've taken the tooth out, we've sterilized the socket with ozone, we've removed the ligament. We now have a clean, bleeding hole in the jawbone. What do they use to fill that socket to help the bone grow back rapidly? Because we established earlier that vegan dentistry absolutely forbids the use of cow bone or pig collagen.
This is where biological dentistry truly shines. It relies on the body's own innate regenerative power. They use PRF, or platelet-rich fibrin.
Explain the process of creating PRF, because it sounds like science fiction.
It's actually elegant biological engineering. Before the dental surgery even begins, a phlebotomist draws a small amount of the patient's own blood from their arm, just like a standard blood test. They take those vials of whole blood and immediately place them into a highly specialized, precisely calibrated centrifuge. The sources specifically mention they utilize the Duo Quattro system, which was developed by Dr. Joseph Chokeround, a pioneer in this field.
What does the centrifuge actually do to the blood?
It spins the vials at a very specific, carefully calculated speed and angle. The physics of the centrifugation process physically separate the components of the blood based on their specific gravity. The heavy red blood cells are pushed to the very bottom of the vial. The clear acellular plasma rises to the very top, but right in the middle, suspended between those layers, the centrifuge creates something extraordinary.
The PRF clot.
Yes. It creates a dense, yellowish, gelatinous matrix. This matrix is essentially a super-concentrated collection of the patient's own white blood cells, their platelets, and their circulating stem cells, all suspended in a dense fibrin network. The dentist carefully extracts this gelatinous plug from the vial.
It is an autologous graft. Auto meaning self. It is literally made from you, exclusively for you.
Exactly. The surgeon takes this biological plug and firmly packs it directly into the clean extraction socket in the jawbone. Because it is 100% the patient's own biological material, there is absolutely zero risk of foreign body rejection. It triggers no immune alarm bells.
And what does it do once it's in the jaw?
It acts as a supercharged biological scaffolding. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, the PRF plug slowly breaks down, and as it does, it continuously releases massive amounts of concentrated growth factors directly into the surrounding bone tissue. It drastically accelerates soft tissue healing, minimizes postoperative pain and swelling, and acts as a beacon for the osteoblast to rush in and rapidly regenerate solid, healthy human bone.
Okay. Let's take a deep breath here and synthesize exactly where we are in this narrative, because the amount of ground we've covered is immense. We have examined a scientifically rigorous, painstakingly developed 13-year clinical evolution. We have the foundational mapping of the oral gut-brain axis dictating the core philosophy. We have the ethical and biological imperative of vegan biocompatibility dictating the supply chain. And we have hyper-advanced biological surgical protocols like smart amalgam removal, ozone therapy, zirconia implants, and autologous PRF tissue engineering, driving the actual clinical outcomes. It sounds like the absolute pinnacle of modern holistic healthcare.
Clinically speaking, It is an incredibly robust, profoundly effective system. But here is the central, unavoidable tension that Victor Ronald KM eventually identified. You can build the most advanced, biologically perfect clinical protocol in the history of medicine. But if the underlying organizational structure delivering that care is fundamentally flawed, the clinical protocol will inevitably eventually be compromised.
Because a clinic isn't just a sterile room with tools, it's a business. It exists within an economic reality. And traditional corporate healthcare prioritizes one thing above all else: volume. It prioritizes shareholder profit and quarterly returns over long-term systemic patient outcomes.
Exactly. The financial incentives of corporate medicine are fundamentally misaligned with the biological requirements of deep systemic healing. Think about the PRF protocol we just discussed. Drawing the patient's blood, spinning it in a centrifuge, waiting for the clot to form, carefully placing it. That takes significant time.
Time is money in a corporate setting. If you have a board of private equity investors demanding a 20% profit margin increase year over year, eventually someone in a suit is going to look at a spreadsheet and say, hey, this PRF process takes 45 minutes. If we just buy cheap off-the-shelf cow bone in bulk, we can pack the socket in 5 minutes. We can see 3 more patients today. The turnover rate increases, the profit increases.
Precisely. Or they'll say, taking the time to isolate a tooth with a dental dam, setting up negative ion generators, and hooking the patient up to an oxygen tank just to remove a silver filling is eating into our margins. Just drill it out fast.
Yeah.
The corporate structure inherently, relentlessly pulls the physical clinic away from the applied healing vision. It degrades the medical standard of care in the pursuit of efficiency.
So Victor Ronald KM realized that to protect the integrity of the clinical protocols, he had to fundamentally blow up the traditional corporate model. And his solution is a massive structural shift to total decentralization. They are currently transitioning the entire Costa Rican BioDental enterprise to become a DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization.
It is a profound, almost dizzying structural reimagining of what a medical clinic can actually be.
But let me pause here because we are throwing around some heavy terminology, and I want to make sure the listener is completely following the mechanics of this. I understand the concept of using a blockchain for decentralized finance. I understand using it to trade cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or using it to verify the ownership of digital art. But we are talking about a physical brick-and-mortar dental clinic with physical centrifuges, heavy surgical chairs, lease agreements, electricity bills, and actual human doctors holding high-speed drills. How on earth do you put a physical building and a medical staff onto a digital blockchain? Who is actually in charge?
It's a critical question. A smart contract on a blockchain cannot physically sign a lease for a building in Costa Rica. It requires a highly sophisticated legal and organizational architecture to bridge the digital code with physical reality. The BioDental sources detail a fascinating 4-layer board architecture, which is securely wrapped in a specific legal structure known as a DNA.
A DNA, Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Association. Explain how that works.
Think of the DNA as the legal wrapper or the translation layer. It is a legally recognized entity in the physical world that is wholly owned and directed by the decentralized code of the DAO in the digital world. The DNA allows the DAO to interact with the real world. Through the DNA, the collective can legally sign commercial real estate leases, they can hold physical bank accounts to pay the electricity bill, they can legally hire and credential surgical staff, and they can formally integrate into massive traditional healthcare systems like the SEMA International Hospital, all while preserving the algorithmic, decentralized governance of its members.
Okay, so the DNA is the legal bridge between the blockchain and the physical world. Let's break down the actual governance. Let's look at this 4-layer board architecture because it's clearly designed as an intricate system of checks and balances to prevent exactly the kind of corporate decay and profit-driven protocol dilution we just talked about.
It is a highly defensive architecture.
Yeah.
Layer 1 is the founding board. Think of this group as the ultimate ideological gatekeepers. Their sole, uncompromising mandate is protective. They do not manage the day-to-day finances. They are there specifically to ensure that the toxin-free mission, the commitment to vegan biocompatibility, and the core tenets of biological dentistry are never, ever diluted by market pressures. They have the power to vet high-level leadership to ensure absolute cultural and ethical alignment before anyone can touch the organization.
They are the guardians of the philosophy. Moving down, layer 2 is the board of trustees. The internal documents describe them as a self-perpetuating body. What does that mean in this specific corporate context?
Self-perpetuating means that the current sitting trustees are the only ones who can elect new trustees when a seat opens up. They form the permanent, stabilizing core of the organization. Their specific role is to provide long-term institutional stability. By strictly controlling their own succession, they insulate the overarching clinical mission from the volatility of external market shifts, sudden economic downturns, or even sudden chaotic changes in the community sentiment. They ensure the heavy ship stays on a steady, long-term course, decade after decade.
Okay, so layers 1 and 2 are the philosophical anchor and the stabilizing ballast. Layer 3 is the board of directors. This sounds more like a traditional corporate structure.
It is. The board of directors is the traditional executive operational layer. They manage the actual flow of capital. They oversee the C-suite, the CEO, COO, and CFO. They are the ones executing the strategic goals on the ground. They are handling the physical realities of clinical expansion, like negotiating the build-out of the new franchise spaces, or securing the purchase orders for complex new medical equipment like CBCT scanners. They operate at the necessary intersection of capital management and clinical capability.
But it is layer 4 where this entire architectural system flips completely upside down and becomes revolutionary. Layer 4 is the DAO board, the community layer.
This is where the true paradigm shift occurs. The DAO board is the mechanism through which the power of healing and the financial control of the clinic is put directly back into the hands of the patients themselves.
The sources explain that everyday patients can actually hold CRBD, DAO, ERC20, DX governance trading tokens. Break that down for someone who has no idea what an ERC20 token is. How does a patient actually use this?
An ERC20 token is essentially a standardized digital asset that lives on the Ethereum blockchain. But in the context of the BioDental DAO, you shouldn't think of it just as cryptocurrency to be day traded for profit. You should think of these tokens as highly secure digital voting shares. By holding these tokens in a digital wallet, the patients, the very people who are sitting in the dental chairs, the people whose lives and immune systems are being actively transformed by these protocols, become active, verified co-owners of the clinical enterprise.
And what power does that token give them?
It gives them the power to govern. They can use their tokens to algorithmically vote via immutable smart contracts on key operational initiatives.
Give me a practical example of how a patient uses a digital token to affect the physical clinic. What kind of initiatives are they actually voting on?
Let's say the clinic's treasury has accumulated a surplus of funds. A proposal is submitted to the DAO. Should the clinic use these funds to purchase 3 state-of-the-art ozone therapy machines for the new Escazú location? Or should the funds be allocated to sponsor a localized clinical research study on how the whole food, plant-based diet affects the oral microbiome of children in Guanacaste? The patients use their tokens to vote on that proposal. Once the vote concludes, the smart contract automatically executes the will of the majority, releasing the funds to the approved initiative. The management activities are entirely decentralized, community-driven, and completely transparent on the public blockchain.
This transparency extends to the data as well, doesn't it? Because in modern healthcare, patient data is incredibly valuable, and it's constantly being siloed, hacked, or monetized by massive corporate entities.
Crucially, yes. Within the DAO structure, patient data, complex treatment plans, and verified clinical outcomes are stored using advanced cryptographic features on an immutable digital ledger. This means the medical data cannot be secretly altered, it cannot be tampered with by a bad actor, and it cannot be monopolized by a single corporate entity for profit. It drastically enhances security, ensures strict patient privacy, and creates a verifiable, globally transparent record of clinical success that the entire patient community can trust implicitly.
It is an absolutely incredible vision. It is the ultimate practical implementation of stakeholder capitalism, where the patient is finally recognized as the ultimate stakeholder. But as we analyze this, we have to address a massive, glaring practical problem. Because building a brilliant Web3 architecture is useless if the average person can't figure out how to access it.
You're talking about the universal acceptance problem, the great bottleneck of decentralized technology.
Exactly. A DAO is revolutionary. Having a physical, biological dental clinic governed democratically by smart contracts is brilliant. But how does an everyday, non-technical patient, someone sitting at home in Ohio or London with a severe toothache, who has absolutely no idea what a Web3 wallet is, who doesn't know how to navigate a decentralized exchange to buy an ERC20 token, how do they actually find this decentralized clinic on their normal, everyday internet browser, like Chrome or Safari?
It is the existential threat to the entire project. If the biodental clinic only exists natively within the siloed Web3 space, it is essentially invisible to 99% of the global population. It remains a fascinating niche crypto experiment rather than a scalable global healthcare solution. It has to bridge the gap into the traditional internet.
Which brings us to the strategic genius of Victor Ronald KM, operating under his decentralized finance handle, Victor Ronald. He recognized this exact functional gap, and he is actively moving to bridge it through a highly complex regulatory maneuver, the ICANN 2026 new gTLD program.
We'll understand the stakes of this. We have to understand what ICANN is. ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation, for assigned names and numbers. They are the global, centralized regulatory body that controls the fundamental architecture of the Internet. Specifically, they control the DNS root zone. They are the organization that gets to decide what letters are legally allowed to come after the dot in a web address.
Like the classic .com, .net, or .org?
Exactly. Those are top-level domains. For years, the list of available top-level domains was heavily restricted. But occasionally, ICANN opens a highly anticipated, highly regulated window where organizations can apply to create brand new generic top-level domains, or gTLDs. And they have announced that the next window is opening in 2026.
And the strategic documents reveal that Victor's ultimate play is to secure total ownership of the .biodental top-level domain.
He already owns the .biodental domain within the decentralized Web3 space, but as we noted, that only resolves on specialized blockchain browsers. By formally applying for the ICANN gTLD, he is attempting to establish .biodental as a globally recognized, universally standard web namespace that will work on every single phone, tablet, and browser on the planet.
The timeline on this application is immediate and incredibly high stakes. The sources lay out the strict ICANN roadmap. The application window opens on April 30 and strictly closes on August 12, 2026. Given that our current context is early April 2026, this massive regulatory maneuver is being actively executed right now, as we speak.
And the barriers to entry are intentionally designed to be astronomical. Applying for a new gTLD is one of the most rigorous, exhaustive, and brutally expensive regulatory procedures in the entire digital world. It is not for the faint of heart. The baseline non-refundable evaluation fee simply to submit the application to ICANN is $227,000. That fee is due almost immediately after the application window closes.
$250,000 just to have the bureaucratic committee read the paperwork. That requires massive institutional financial backing.
Which is precisely where the strategic partnership with America BioHealth Partners comes into play.
Yeah.
They're providing the necessary capital scaffolding to ensure that the newly formed DAO can meet these stringent, non-negotiable financial obligations without bankrupting the clinical operations.
But money isn't the only hurdle here. What happens if there is competition? What happens if some massive multi-billion-dollar corporate dental conglomerate who perhaps wants to co-opt the biological marketing trend without actually adopting the strict protocols decides they want to own the .biodental domain too? They have incredibly deep pockets. They submit a competing application. Now what happens?
This is where the structural, strategic brilliance of the DAO formation really proves its worth. When multiple different entities apply for the exact same string of letters, ICANN places them all into what is called a contention set. Historically, these contention sets are often resolved through brutal private auctions, where the highest bidder simply buys the domain out from under the others. A massive corporate conglomerate would win that bidding war instantly against a single holistic clinic. But Victor has a trump card hidden in the ICANN bylaws, the Community Priority Evaluation, or CPE. Exactly. ICANN has a built-in mechanism designed to protect genuine communities from being bullied by sheer corporate capital. If an applicant can unequivocally prove to the evaluation committee that they represent a specific, clearly defined, and well-established global community, they can be granted priority status over purely commercial applicants. If they win the CPE, they bypass the private auction entirely and are awarded the domain.
So because Victor hasn't just been running a solitary clinic, but has spent 13 years meticulously building the physical infrastructure of Costa Rican BioDental, educating patients, publishing protocols, and is now legally and algorithmically formalized that entire patient base into the world's first clinical service DAO.
He has built the perfect argument. He can legitimately, legally demonstrate to ICANN that the BioDental DAO represents a vast, unified, highly engaged global community of biological dentistry patients, practitioners, and advocates. The DAO isn't just a clever corporate shell. It is a verifiable, cryptographic living community of active stakeholders. This positions the organization perfectly to win a community priority evaluation against any corporate challenger.
So to synthesize this into a clear visual, if the BioDental DAO represents this beautiful, decentralized, biologically harmonious medical utopia where patients govern their own healing, The .biodental ICANN domain is basically the authoritative, universally recognized front door to that utopia. It allows the everyday internet user sitting on their couch with a toothache to type a simple, intuitive web address into their normal browser, step safely out of the centralized Web 2 world, and walk directly, seamlessly into the Web 3 ecosystem to get the help they need.
That is the pure essence of universal acceptance. Overcoming that massive technical barrier ensures that global regulatory bodies, traditional Web 2 commercial browsers, and advanced Web 3 crypto wallets all seamlessly interact with the exact same digital asset. It proves to the entire medical and tech world that the BioDental DAO isn't just a theoretical white paper or a temporary crypto experiment. It is a permanent, highly accessible, deeply functional new model for global healthcare delivery.
We have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of ground today. Let me try to concisely synthesize this monumental 13-year journey for you, the listener, because Victor Ronald KM didn't just have a single good idea. He executed a cascading series of massive paradigm shifts that logically built upon one another.
It is a masterclass in truly systemic, holistic organizational design. You cannot separate the clinical practice from the business structure.
Exactly. He started by taking the abstract concept of holistic dentistry and proving its absolute biological necessity by mapping the intricate mechanics of the oral gut-brain axis. Recognizing that the mouth is a direct active highway to the brain, he stripped out all the hidden inflammatory animal derivatives to launch Vegan Dental Inc., perfectly aligning medical biocompatibility with the deep ethical principle of ahimsa. He then built actual, physical, brick-and-mortar clinics across Costa Rica, establishing the highest possible clinical standards with meticulous procedures like the smart amalgam removal, ozone therapy, and autologous PRF bone regeneration. And now, in the final, most radical stroke, he's taken the keys to that entire incredibly valuable empire and handing them directly over to the patients themselves through a decentralized blockchain DAO, permanently securing its digital future with a proprietary ICANN domain.
It is the complete, uncompromising codification of an applied healing vision into both biological reality and immutable digital infrastructure.
And the ultimate so what for you, the listener, is profound. This deep dive proves that the actual future of medicine isn't just about sitting around waiting for a pharmaceutical company to invent a better pill or a robotics company to invent a sharper scalpel. True, systemic health is fundamentally about building better, more resilient organizational structures. Structures where the financial incentives are perfectly aligned with human biology and where the patient is recognized as the ultimate stakeholder, not just a profit center to be mined.
Which leaves us with a very provocative, very real final thought to consider as we close. We have just extensively detailed how a highly specialized, surgically intensive medical field like biological dentistry can be successfully decentralized, tokenized, and governed effectively by the patients themselves using blockchain technology. The model works. So what happens when this model inevitably spreads?
Oh, that opens up a massive question for the entire healthcare industry.
It does. Could your entire primary care network, your local massive hospital system, or even your systemic health insurance provider soon be stripped of its corporate board and run entirely by you and your community on a transparent, immutable digital ledger?
It completely shatters the diagnostic muddy waters we started with.
Yeah.
Because when the patient actually owns the clinic, the goal is no longer just finding a broken part to drill and bill as quickly as possible. The goal becomes true, systemic visibility. A completely open, transparent, living ecosystem focused solely on deep human health.
Exactly. The mechanics garage is officially closed. The era of biological decentralized healing is open.
I couldn't have synthesized it better myself. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Keep questioning the massive systems around you, keep looking for the hidden biological connections, and we will see you next time.